G'day, Zach's Place. Good to be with you once again. Gee, we're missing meeting together, aren't we? It'd be great to get through some of these restrictions and be able to meet back together again. But in the meantime, we're very lucky, really, to have technology that can draw us together in some ways and help us to study the Word of God and see how it applies to us in our days and see how it applies to us in the future when we're able to get back and become involved in the community around us. We're up to Nehemiah chapter 6. We've been studying the book of Nehemiah over the last few weeks, the story of Nehemiah who returned to Jerusalem, which was in destruction, and helped to rebuild that city by rebuilding the walls and the gates and starting to bring structure back into the city again. So if you want to turn off the video and have a look at chapter 6, I'll be here when you get back. So welcome back. Nehemiah chapter 6. The walls have been completed. 52 days. Amazing stuff. What a feat. What a task had been completed by Nehemiah and all of his countrymen. And it was a fantastic way that it happened. In fact, in the beginning of the chapter, we see that the walls have been completed, but by the end of the chapter we see the walls and the gates have been completed, and that's what took them 52 days. But the opponents are not happy. Now remember, we've been having a look at opponents, opposition to the work across the last couple of weeks. And Sanballat and Tobiah and the surrounding nations, they're just not happy with what's going on, and they're certainly not happy that the wall has been completed and that the gates are under construction. And so this chapter gives us more detail on the opposition that Nehemiah was facing from new tactics. You know, they'd been intimidating them. They'd been telling them that it wasn't amount to anything. A fox would walk on the wall and it'd crash down, and the work was pathetic and they'd never be able to finish it. These were the tactics of mockery and slander and just having a go at them. None of that had worked, and so now they've got some new tactics, and they come to Nehemiah, and you would have seen in the passage, they come to him and say, hey, let's have a meeting together. Let's seek to have an amicable resolution of our differences. Let's have a meeting. Sounds like some political stuff that goes on, doesn't it? But it was a setup, and Nehemiah saw all through that, and it didn't fool Nehemiah at all. And so he said no. They kept on writing letters to him, 4 times actually, and Nehemiah kept on saying no. And then it tells us in this passage that a 5th letter was sent from Sanballat. And he was accusing Nehemiah and accusing the Jews of insurrection, saying, what you're really doing is you're building up your own kingdom and you're going to establish Nehemiah as king. And this is not going to be taken very well by the Medo-Persian Empire. So we better meet together and talk about how we're going to handle this. And because, he was accusing him or them of insurrection and rebellion against the empire. Well, Nehemiah disputes the rumours. He says, what a load of rubbish. This is fake news. That's what he'd call it today, fake news. And it's been invented by Sanballat. It's been invented with the purpose of intimidating and of discouraging the Jews. He saw right through it. What a wise man. What a wise leader. Saw right through the stuff that this was something that was being invented by Sanballat with evil purposes at hand. And so Nehemiah shoots up a prayer to God. He's really good at these rocket prayers, and we've seen a few times in Nehemiah how he shoots up these rocket prayers. And this one is, God, please strengthen me and make me courageous. Now, the idea of strengthening me is please give me everything that I need to be able to do this task. So that would be physical strength and moral strength, and strength of identity to be able to take all this garbage that's being thrown at him. But it would also be the wisdom that he needs and the discernment that he needs. So in praying for strength, he's also praying for wisdom. God, help me to know what to do and help me to see through the crap. Help me to see through the stuff that just isn't true that these people are throwing at me. The passage goes on to tell us in some detail one of the strategies that was used against Nehemiah. He's invited to the temple, supposedly for protection, as his opponents supposedly are on their way to kill him tonight. And so, Tobiah and Sanballat and various others got together, and they got one of their mates in the temple, and they said, invite Nehemiah into the temple, and sort of to protect him with the guise of protecting him. And Nehemiah saw through this as well, but saw that it was actually a plan to discredit Nehemiah. Because if Nehemiah ran away through fear, it would mean that he was committing the sin, or as Nehemiah saw it, the sin of not trusting God. And he did trust God. And if he ran away into the temple to hide from people who were going to kill him, well, he saw that as running away and not trusting God. And he saw that that would give him a bad reputation and it would discredit him. So he said, no, I'm not going to. This is not of God. I'm not being fooled by that strategy, he says. This is not of God, and in fact, it's false prophecy. Again, Nehemiah is so wise and discerning in the way that he's leading the people. And then the passage tells us when the opponents heard that the whole project was completed, not only the walls but the gates as well, when the whole project was completed in the 52 days, they were the ones who felt intimidated. They were the ones who lost their confidence, and they were the ones who realised that this task had actually been accomplished by God. It was something that God was at work and God was doing, and it had been accomplished by God. Great passage, isn't it? Great passage. So how do we reflect on that? Well, there's many different things that jump out of the passage, but for me it's one of the things is Nehemiah as a leader. An amazing leader. He was wise and discerning. He was able to see things as they really were, able to understand what was really going on. Nothing that was being thrown at him worked. A whole lot of deception, a whole lot of rumours, a whole lot of fake news, a whole lot of garbage was being thrown at him, and it didn't work because he was wise and he was discerning. God give us leaders like this today. He knows the marks of God's work. He understands the character of God, and so he knows how God works. God doesn't work through deception. God doesn't work through rumours. God doesn't work through slander, through mockery. God doesn't work in that sort of way. That's not his character. And Nehemiah understands the character of God, and so therefore he knows the way that God is working. And he can trust God without fear, and which he does. He trusts God. To run away would be to not trust God, he says. And so he couldn't have this fear instilled in him, and he was able to trust God. But one of the things that comes through the passage to me very clearly is that he cares about not giving God a bad name. He realizes what's really at stake, and what's really at stake here is that if he runs away, if he's filled with fear, if he lets God down in all of this, it's actually giving God a bad name, and he doesn't want to do that. He realizes that's the key to it. And so in the work that he was doing, this was God's work, and he's been given the responsibility of doing God's work, and he doesn't want to give God a bad name. If the church just grasped this truth, it would be a wonderful thing, that we actually let God down, and we let God's name down and his reputation down when the church doesn't act in ways of integrity, in ways that don't match the character of God. It's God's name that is at stake. Give us leadership and give us church that is committed to seeing God's work God's work completed, getting God's job done, no matter what the opposition is, to getting the work through faithful people and faithful leaders that God is doing. And this applies to us in Yarra Junction, in the Yarra Valley and the Yarra Ranges. God is at work here. It might not seem like it sometimes, but God is at work here. And he has called us to be those faithful ones to carry his work forward for his name's sake. That's not just a little thing we put on the end of prayer, for your name's sake. That's really the whole thing, and Nehemiah understood it very well, that this is for your name's sake. This is for your reputation. God give us churches that are so keen to make sure that God's reputation is in any way not diminished, but is enhanced, is shown to be something that is good and desirable. Well, as usual, we always look about what about Jesus? Does this fit in with what Jesus was doing? Because that's really the model that we follow. We're followers of Jesus. So how does this line up with Jesus? Well, in so many ways it does. Just to name a couple, I think Nehemiah was a model of what Christ would be like, and of what Christ would teach. The wisdom, the wisdom of Jesus in what he taught and the way that he taught, incredible. Jesus was able to see through deception. The deception, whether it be Satan throwing it at him, or whether it be people that he dearly loves, like Peter, throwing deception at him, suggesting things that were just not true. Other forms of opposition that he faced throughout his time on earth. Jesus was able to face that opposition and wasn't sucked in by it. And Jesus had a faithfulness that was driven by his care that God is glorified and that God's work is completed. That we see that time and again, don't we? Jesus says, it's my Father's work that I'm doing, and it must be completed. Not my will, but your will be done. It was always focusing on the fact that he was doing God's work, the Father's work, here on earth, and it must be completed no matter what the opposition. Amazing leadership from Jesus. And I think Nehemiah was a type of that. Nehemiah was a model of what Jesus would be like. And so we see, once again, that the teachings of this book, Nehemiah, line up very well with the person of Jesus and what he's like and what he teaches. Well, what about an application? Well, I thought that it might be a good idea to have a bit of a case study to help us to apply some of these truths. I thought of this. Zach's Place is involved in some community development work in Yarra Junction that's going to help transform the town for young people. The church, in partnership with other agencies, is almost finished the work, and some business people in the region get worried about what more youth in the town might do to local business. And so they decide to try and discredit the church. They spread rumours on Facebook about God Squad, and they spread rumours on Facebook about Zach's Place. They invite Ned, as leader, to some meetings with the heavies to supposedly work things out amicably. But in reality, they're trying to set him up and publish false stories about him in the media with the plan to give him a bad reputation. But Ned, assisted by the leadership of the squad and the church and all the people, prays to God for wisdom and strength. They're able to debunk the false rumours, and Ned refuses to go to the meeting because he knows it's a setup. The work gets finished, the kids come to town, and the opposition is left with egg on their faces. That's the possibility. That's the possibility that it could happen like that. And that's a case study, and that's the sort of stuff that was going on in Nehemiah's time, translated into what might be reality for Zach's Place in the community around us. We really need that sort of leadership. I praise God for the leadership that he's given to Zach's Place, and may it continue to be strengthened, and may we become more and more like Jesus, as Nehemiah was, in his leadership capacity to be able to see through the deception and the fake news and the stuff that's happening that just is not of God, so that we can see God's work completed. Great story, isn't it? Thanks for listening. Cheers.